Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to Seminary Ridge Museum's Tuesday Facebook Live. We've got a very special Facebook Live for you today because we are outside. We are on location. It is a beautiful day here in Gettysburg. We thought we would get outside to a mystery location and talk a little bit about the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. My name is Pete Mealy. I am Executive Director at Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. Behind the camera, we have Rob Williams, our Director of Outreach, who is doing a great job monitoring all these things. He's going to be taking your questions as you comment. We did a mystery Facebook Live. We had a photograph, very close-up photograph of the barricade of rails, which is behind me, looking out towards the field and the swale between Seminary Ridge, which is behind the camera, and McPherson Ridge, which is about 640 yards in the distance. And what I want to do this afternoon is build upon a story that we were telling a few weeks ago about Lieutenant Colonel George McFarland of the 151st Pennsylvania Volunteers. We were inside the building that day talking about McFarland's life and McFarland's Civil War experience, but I wanted to bring you out here today to where he had maybe his greatest moment in the Civil War, commanding the men of the 151st Pennsylvania Volunteers here behind the barricade of rails during the final attack of the Confederate Pender's Division on July 1st, 1863. And I want to really take this moment and this moment in time on July 1st and think about probably the two most important virtues in McFarland's life, that of leadership and that of learning, and how both of those played out here on this ridge here in to the west of Gettysburg. And we're actually going to take a walk back to the site where he is eventually wounded and talk about being brought into the Seminary Hospital. So George McFarland was an educator. He was a school principal in Juniata County in McAllisterville, Pennsylvania. Highly valued education. Is elected as the Lieutenant Colonel of the 151st Pennsylvania in the fall of 1862 and is going to be leading the regiment here on July 1st, 1863. And in his time as the Lieutenant Colonel, he highly valued education both for himself, learning about being a Civil War soldier and a leader, and then also educating his soldiers. So we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we talked about him getting his soldiers to take target practice in the winter of 1863, and that's going to play out here as well. So the 151st Pennsylvania arrives on the field after the initial fighting between Archer's Brigade and the Iron Brigade in Herbst Woods. We're at the lull in the fighting about midday. And that's when the 151st and the rest of Chapman Biddle's brigade arrives here on the field. And they're going to be stationed up on McPherson Ridge, just a little bit north of the Fairfield Road, in line of battle, sort of to the left and behind the Iron Brigade, which is taken up position there in Herbst Woods, where they had been during the morning fighting. As Robert Rodes' division and Robert Rodes' artillery is up on Oak Hill, it begins shelling the line, shelling Biddle's brigade. They have to change position 2 times, and eventually the 151st Pennsylvania is detached from the rest of the brigade and brought back here to the seminary grounds as Abner Doubleday's last reserve force. And they're going to be here behind this hastily constructed barricade of rails that was thrown up a little bit earlier in the day by the men of Gabriel Paul's brigade, who are now moved up towards Oak Ridge to face the threat from up there. So the 151st, 467 men strong, is here behind this barricade of rails. They are Abner Doubleday's last reserve force. And as the fighting resumes on in Herbst Woods on McPherson Ridge, the 151st, who only have 27 days before they're supposed to be mustered out, the 151st takes to their feet and moves across the open field there into Herbst Woods, the corner of Herbst Woods, the southeastern corner, and plugging a hole between the Iron Brigade to their right and Biddle's brigade to their left. And as they move in, George McFarland gives his men the order that they should each aim at a specific man and fire, not to fire by volley, but to take specific aim and make sure their target dropped. And as McFarland says later on, many of the men were brought low that day. So the education, the The target practice that McFarland had instilled in his men is being played out right here in Herbst Woods. As McFarland's men go in, the men on either side, the Iron Brigade on one side and Biddle's Brigade on the other side, begin to start pulling back as the pressure in Herbst Woods that Pettigrew's brigade is putting on the Union soldiers becomes too overwhelming. Eventually, McFarland looks to either side of him, and he sees that he has no support on his right or his left, and he decides it is his time to begin pulling back. It is not a pell-mell retreat across the open fields like you might think, but a very orderly retreat, with the lines falling back, turning, firing, falling back, turning, and firing, contesting this ground and stopping Pettigrew's brigade in its tracks on the crest of McPherson Ridge. It's now behind the barricade of rails about 4:30 in the afternoon. These men of the First Corps have been fighting all day. They're tired, they're hot, they're running low on ammunition. But they're in a very advantageous position. Dorsey Pender gets two of his brigades going across the open fields you'll see in front of me, behind me. Abner Perrin's brigade of South Carolinians, Alfred Scales' brigade of North Carolinians, as they crest the hill, crest the ridge behind me and begin coming across that open field. The 21 cannon of Charles Wainwright's artillery open fire on them and begin to knock holes in the Confederate line coming across that open field. As the Confederate line gets to about the center of the swale, Scales' brigade goes to ground. It's too much for them, and Perrin's brigade begins to falter. By this time, George McFarland's 151st are beginning to fire volleys into the South Carolinians, and it looks like the South Carolinians are going to go down. Abner Perrin rides out in front of his men on his horse. He sees a gap in the barricade of rail line just to the south of where the line ends. There's a 50-yard gap between the last infantry of the 121st Pennsylvania and the men of Buford's cavalry division. And Perrin sends the 12th, 13th South Carolina through that gap. He has the 1st South Carolina march at an oblique, wheels into line of battle, and fires up the barricade line, finally dislodging this line here on Seminary Ridge, and the final position of the First Corps on July 1st, west of town. George McFarland is here. He talks about losing a horse. He's riding on horse behind his men, giving them encouragement, and he has his horse shot out from under him, and it's time for the 151st to begin pulling back. And we're going to take a little walk here. We're going to take up my microphone cord. Rob Williams again behind the camera, helping us out. McFarland is going to start to retreat. He's towards the main seminary building, built in 1832, home today of Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. It's a lot of smoke in this area. Many of the men who are fighting in this area smoke, lots of gunfire, lots of cannon fire, so it's really difficult to see what's going on. And as Abner Perrin rides his horse out in front of his men, it's very likely that the men of the barricade line could not see Perrin because of the smoke. It would be likely, had he been seen, they would have probably taken him down. But that's one of the theories, the working theories that we have. So we're going to come up here towards the seminary building. McFarland is following up on his men. The 1st South Carolina would be just to the left of me, just to the south of the museum building. And as the 151st, the men that are left are passing by the north end of the seminary building, McFarland stops and crouches down. Again, with all the smoke, he has to crouch down and underneath the smoke to be able to see what's following behind him. And as he does that, he crouches down and he looks, and the 1st South Carolina, just to the south of the building, fires a volley. Now, most of the 151st Pennsylvania are not hit by that volley, but George McFarland is hit in both legs. And he doesn't know. He says it was either one bullet that goes through both legs or two bullets that hit him simultaneously about 20 paces off the northwest corner of the building. So likely about where that tree is or where that sign is, our sign is. Well, McFarland goes to the ground, and some of his men stop to pick him up, and he says, "No, go on, leave me." But one soldier does not pay attention to his commander. Private Lyman Wilson picks McFarland up. McFarland throws his arm over Lyman Wilson's shoulder, and Wilson drags McFarland into the north end of the building just as the Confederates are coming in through the south end of the building. McFarland looks later on, and he notices that some of the buttons on the sleeve of his frock coat had been taken off by a bullet that hit him as Private Wilson was pulling him into the building. So this bullet that took McFarland's buttons off barely missed Private Wilson. McFarland is going to be put in a room on the first floor of the building. He's going to write that he's going to lie in a pool of his own blood for 3 days while the battle is raging, without food, water, or medical care, because this was a Union field hospital. However, by this time it's been taken over by the Confederates, and it's going to stay in Confederate hands until July 5th, 1863, when the last Confederate units retreat. Lieutenant Colonel McFarland is going to lose his right leg to amputation. His left ankle is going to be shattered, and he is going to spend 2.5 months in this building recovering. On September 16, 1863, he leaves. He goes back to Juniata County, and he picks up his life again as he can, being a teacher, being a community leader, goes eventually to work for the state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, heading up the Soldiers' Orphan System, and lives until 1891 in considerable pain, suffering from the wounds that he suffered here on the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. So Lieutenant Colonel George McFarland, very important figure in Seminary Ridge Museum, Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center exhibit. Very important here on the seminary grounds. Leaves a great diary of his experiences in the war and in the field hospital. So I want to thank you for joining me for this very special Tuesday Facebook Live on location here on Seminary Ridge. And we hope to see you again next week. We'll be talking about Andrew Gregg Tucker and Jeremiah Hoffman, 2 patients who are here, again, wounded out here, patients in the hospital, and we'll be talking about their story. So thank you very much. We hope that you'll like this, that you'll share this special program with your friends. Let them see the great content that you're viewing. If you really like what you're seeing, I invite you to contribute to Seminary Ridge Museum. It's because of your generosity that we can continue doing some of these great programs. Membership and donation is a great way to help us out, and we hope to see you up on the ridge soon.